Well, what?
That's as loud as you could crack it. It's just a noisy yak.
That's the sleepy sign.
All right. Welcome to the next episode of the Radical Parenting Podcast. This week I'm joined by my friend Laura Turley, and we're going to review a book called The Explosive Child by, what's his name? Greene?
Yeah, Greene. Yeah. I don't actually remember his surname. Isn't that terrible?
Ross Greene. So, Laura, why don't you, before we get started, just quickly introduce yourself and your daughter?
Yeah, I actually did ask her if she wanted to take part in this, and she was like, no. So, yeah, I'm Laura Turley. I'm an integrative therapist and a radical honesty certified trainer. I live in the UK, in the southwest of the UK, and I've been a parent for about 13, almost 14 years. My daughter's almost 14 now. And she has Asperger's. She was diagnosed with Asperger's when she was around 6 years old. And it was a bit of a shock to us at the time. And a lot of my kind of like ideas of what a parent was going to be, being a parent was going to be like, kind of changed a lot after we figured out what was going on with her. And the reason I picked this book is because it was incredibly helpful to me when she was about 6 or 7 years old, and has continued to be.
Awesome. And tell me your daughter's name.
Her name's Faye.
Faye.
With an E.
With an E at the end.
She asked me to say that.
Cool. Do you have the book in front of you right now?
I do. I've got my Kindle copy, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I forgot to bring my copy. And I mainly want you to talk. I mean, this is not an area I'm at all an expert in. But a couple weeks ago, Kara and I did an episode on children's books, and I wanted to tell you a little story about that. So when my first nephew was born, I just got so excited about parenting and started reading parenting books, and I've since had now 3 nephews, a niece, and then my own son. I was looking for books that really taught the literacy of like facial expression and I was raised in part watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I thought like a child that had like the skills of like a Deanna Troi would have like a real leg up in the world. I also thought like I don't really want to like say no to my kid very much. I don't want to do much like punishment and discipline and that sort of thing, and that teaching my child the skills of empathy would give them their own moral compass and prevent me from really ever having to say no. I could just redirect like, well, how do you think, I did a lot of like evaluation of when we do say no, and most of the time it's either unnecessary or it's because our children are kind of failing to take into account other people's perspectives or needs. Mm-hmm. And so I thought just like this ongoing study of this would be cool. So I searched for a bunch of books, and so many of them had like moralism built into it. And this is before I was involved with radical honesty, but I wasn't a fan of like, this is good and this is bad. Just mainly like we have those skills. We know what it feels like to feel bad in our body, and we don't generally then want other people to feel that way. And all the books that ended up being good were all aimed at autistic kids, and kids with Asperger's or on the spectrum or phrasing.
Non-neurotypical.
Yeah, non-neurotypical. And so I bought this whole set of books, every book by this woman, Sarah Medina, and it wasn't that much. It was like a couple $100 maybe for every book. And it starts at really young ages with feelings that young kids can understand. And then at the end, it has actual pictures advised from Paul Ekman and the facial action coding system. So kids can like pick out these like minute, facial expressions, whatever. My sister ended up getting rid of those books. I don't know exactly why. And now they're all out of print. So now they cost anywhere from like $20 to $100 per book. And there's like 40 of them. So I've been like scouring eBay and whatnot to find them because they're still my favorite books on the subject. The point is that so much of the like the best books for that, including ones about being in touch with your body, are all aimed at kids with Asperger's. And last week, Kara and I did an episode about mainly about raising blind children or vision impaired children. And again, just all the lessons are just so useful. So my point is, this episode isn't really just for parents of children with the children on the spectrum. This is, I think everything I read in this book, I really appreciate you recommending it to me. Everything I read is so valuable for any parent.
Yeah, and my sense is as well, like having reread it, and yeah, I was smiling so much rereading it yesterday, because I imagine it's really, really influenced like the way that I parent, like, and this is like 6-7 years later. I don't know, I'll tell you about something that happened this week, which was just absolutely typical of the kind of thing that was described in the book. But my sense, like rereading it, was, yeah, it's really sound like advice for kind of like anyone who has a kid who they're kind of like in conflict with, any kind of conflict. But I mean, I guess a lot of the examples they give of a kid sort of between the ages of about sort of like 11 to 13 kind of thing. A lot of the examples are given with older kids, but the kind of technique that they teach, like this sort of 3-step technique, I was using with Faye when she was 6 or 7 years old, and it worked brilliantly. It was like a friggin' charm, And one of the things that I noticed so much when I was rereading it is I read this book before I trained like to be a therapist, and so much of what it teaches is what I was taught as a therapist, like about reflective, like listening, and kind of like that technique of like just reflecting back, like the phrases that people are saying, with this sense of like, if you do that, you have without really understanding why, you have a sense that you're being heard and you're being seen and listened to. And really it's just the simplest thing in the world to just reflect back what it is that you're hearing. And a lot of the things, which was so surprising to me, a lot of the things that they talk about are really kind of rooted in the stuff that we learn, like in Radical Honesty, about listening without being attached to like an idea of what's actually going on, is something that I was taught like when I was training, but also like absolutely we teach in workshops, like how do you listen to someone and talk to someone without being attached to the idea that I know what's going on with you, I understand already like what the problem is. It's like that separation between like noticing and imagining again. And they talk about that a lot in the book as well, which again I was smiling thinking, oh shit, yeah, they talk a lot about like noticing and kind of observing like without judgment, like this is what I see, and what does that mean for you, kind of thing.
Yeah,
which was so cool, like to reread all that stuff and realize actually this was informing me like long before I started training even.
Yeah. So to give a little context, that Laura's form of therapy and everything she and I have studied together with Radical Honesty isn't about psychoanalysis. Sometimes we can't help but do a little bit of it in our mind, but at the very least, the training is to hold those analyses really lightly, show your noticings, objective noticings, sure, anything you're imagining or analyzing based on that noticing, but hold those imaginings lightly. So yeah, I mean, that's all what you said, but for those who need a little bit of context.
Yeah.
Before we jump into the book, I wanted to share. So I got a hard copy, which is great, a used book that I ordered from Amazon, because it's not on tape. I usually listen on tape, but I read this one, and I loved that it was owned by a parent. I loved reading their little notes in the margins.
Well, they wrote notes.
I loved seeing what they were highlighting, and yeah, I just really loved it. I just imagined this parent reading this, and I don't know. It's also touching, and the stories in it are so touching, and just this desire to want the best for your kid, and that's what this book's about. But the opening, before even so I was reading the 5th edition. I think there's been one edition since then, but there was a quote from Aristotle that I want to share as part of just like before even the preface or prologue or whatever. It says, anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that is not easy. I wrote down for us to pause for a second. I just want people to be able to think about that. Anyone can become angry. That is easy. but to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way. This is not easy. Have you ever heard that before?
No, I haven't. And I don't think I even read the intro when I read the book. So
yeah, I mean, it's awesome, isn't it? Aristotle, that's a long time ago. This is like all that Brad Blanton teaches. This is like, we didn't really need him. We just needed this Aristotle
just needed
quote.
Aristotle.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into that too much, but when I first was getting into radical honesty, I read a study about catharsis therapy kind of approach, where they were kind of arguing and concluding through data that catharsis therapy and letting people like express their anger can just elevate the anger, as opposed to letting it like subside. And so it was this study where they were measuring people's feelings of anger and encouraging them to express it, whatever. And I shared that study with Brad Blanton because Brad has a process that is really like what Aristotle's talking about here. It's about getting over, fully experiencing your anger when it comes up so that you can get over it. And yeah, that was essentially his response, was like, this isn't catharsis. This is about re-grounding yourself in reality and what actually happened, distinguishing your stories from the actions that happened, getting in touch with just reality, just kind of like stuff you can't rage against. And just, yeah, radical honesty's, that exercise is about being angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way
too. It's really important.
Yeah. So often we don't even know how angry we are or what we're angry at. And so, yeah, that's partly what this book is about. So let's just jump into it. And thank you again for introducing me to it.
Yeah, I kind of like, I went through my notes because it's my Kindle copy that I've got, and I obviously it's great because you highlight sections, don't you? But I've also got a paper copy which I don't have now, which I wrote a lot of handwritten notes when I had it. But yeah, when I looked back through it, the part that I jumped to like straight away, I guess, was yeah, I jumped into quite a few of the little scenarios, kind of like the breakdown scenarios, but I jumped to the part like that he calls Plan B, which is basically where he talks about like breaking down like the 3-step process, because that was the part that that I remembered most clearly, you know, I guess when I read the book. And I remember vividly reading that part of the book sat at a kitchen table after I dropped Faye off from school one morning, and she was going through a really, really tough time at school, and I was being called in almost every day by a headmaster, being told to come and pick her up because she'd hit someone, she'd done something violent in class. And I was reading that chapter and I started crying, like, because I just thought, oh my god, you know, I've just been doing everything completely wrongly, and I couldn't wait for her to get out of school so I could try what they described. And I thought she was literally at school just around the corner, and when she came home from school like a couple of hours later, she sat at the table and she was really angry and she would barely speak. And I just started doing what he was describing there. Like I started with that first step, and I actually said like, so yeah, so I noticed that you've been kind of hitting like other kids at school, like what's up with that? I actually said it in a way where I wasn't like, there was no sense of kind of like anger or like judgment, because I was just curious, you know, what's going to happen if I ask her this question, like in the way that I asked. And I remember she was just like playing with her food or something, and she just started talking, like she started telling me like what had been happening, and it was absolutely miraculous. Like I remember thinking like, why have I never thought of this before? You know, it was like, just ask the question without judgment and without an agenda in mind of like, we're going to solve this problem, you know. And then I just started like reflecting back what she was saying, and she just carried on talking. And I mean, bear in mind, up until then she was barely like speaking to us. She was just so mad, like about going to school every day. She'd come home from school, she wouldn't speak, she'd just go straight to her room. And suddenly I was having these amazing like conversations with her where she was telling me what was going on. And then I was kind of, and I think I actually got all the way to the third step, which is like the invitation, like, oh, what are we, you know, how are we going to solve this? Like, and the thing that amazed me was she had ideas, you know, like of what we could do.
Awesome. So before we get too deep into them, will you just share those 3 steps for those who heard you reference them but might not have hooked onto the 3 steps?
Yeah. So the first step is what he calls like the empathy step, which is
Understanding.
the step where you kind of you talk about the thing that you want to talk about. So like whatever it is that the issue is that has been like, oh, and we need to just pick one, you know, in that instance, you know, because if you're having lots of issues with a kid, you have to pick something. So his kind of examples are things like, I notice like you're having trouble clearing up your room, you know. And the thing about the kind of empathy step is it has to be like an observation, and it has to be something that you can kind of observe. So you have to say like, you know, something that you've actually seen happen, and then you have to
And
ask
as
like,
specific as possible too. So not just like you've been having troubles at school, but like you specifically hit
like
someone.
you seem really angry. I mean, that's
Yeah.
such a sort of general thing. So I guess he doesn't say, like, he doesn't actually say to sort of like pick something that's observable, like with your eyes or with your senses. But I mean, I guess that's what I did because it seemed the way to go about it. And then you ask kind of clarifying like questions about like what that is, you know. So like if I have a question like what's up with the fact that, you know, you're hitting kids in school, which is what my question was. And she started saying, oh, I think she said something like oh, they're mean to me or something. Oh, they're mean to me and they say mean things to me. And I was like, okay, so they say mean things to you. Like, oh, she'd never told me that before. And I was like, oh, okay, you never told me that. Like, what sort of things do they say? You know, and so all of that kind of like that first step is like trying to work out exactly what it is that's going on for the kid. And it's about like information gathering. Like, you know, I need all the information that I can get about this thing that's happening, but keeping in mind all the time that I'm not coming up with a solution, I'm not coming up with a fix, I'm just gathering information about what it is that's going on. And doing that by just asking like open questions, but also like asking questions that kind of reflect back what it is that they're saying, so that they know that you're kind of listening as you're gathering information. You're not, he calls it drilling, which I think is quite a weird phrase because it sounds like you're drilling them for information. But that is essentially what you're doing. You're kind of drilling down like through the initial statement and kind of figuring out what it is that's actually going on, like with the specifics of what's going on. Yeah.
And then 2.
And then 2, yeah. He calls step 2 define the problem. And I guess like I think of like define the problem as kind of that's your opportunity then to say what it is that is the issue, like what's the problem. Because obviously like the fact that she was hitting kids in school was a problem, because she was getting sent home from school. But also the thing that I was scaring myself about a lot was other kids hated her. They thought she was this like violent bully. So defining the problem is kind of like talking about, you know, what's underneath this thing that I'm worried about. And the way that he describes like getting into that is to say like the thing is, the thing is. So like how to kind of
is you're having difficulty with, right?
Yeah. So to kind of talk about it in a way where you're not saying like, again, it's not accusatory. It's not like this is a problem and you need to sort your crap out. You know, it's like here's the thing. You know, it's like if you continue to hit kids, like I'm scared that, you know, no one will like you, or I'm scared that, you know, you'll get sent home from school and maybe then, you know, you'll get in trouble, you know, or we'll get in trouble. And it's like it's kind of like picking apart what the actual problem is, like underneath the thing that's happening, which he kind of talks about as being your kind of opportunity to kind of let them know it from your perspective. You know, this is why I'm upset about it, you know, this is why we're even talking about it, you know. Which I thought was like, at the time she was quite small when I did that, so it was quite a challenge for me to kind of explain to her what it was that I was worried about. But I think it was also really helpful to me, because on the surface what I was worried about was getting in trouble, like, you know, the fact that I was or being judged as a bad parent or something like that. But actually underneath it was this other fear of like, oh, you know, she won't be liked.
It's going to be hard on her.
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
third, sorry, I didn't want to go into so much detail with each of them.
That's okay.
The
So yeah, the third step is what he calls like the invitation. So that's the part where you talk to them about like, well, how are we going to solve this?
Mhm.
But it's collaborative rather than being like a kind of like, okay, so I've heard what you said and now here's the solution.
Here's the solution. Yeah.
So his sense is kind of like, how do you collaborate with your kid, like in terms of actually working out what the solution is? Because the idea being like, if they can come up with like an idea, because of course they're the one it's involved, so they're best informed, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
That they're more likely to actually do the thing that you're talking about doing. But also that this is the thing I discovered is kids have really good ideas. You know, she had really good ideas about what we could do. And she also suggested a few things that were crazy, like I say crazy, but she said like, I just want to be homeschooled, you know, or something like that. I could be homeschooled. And I was like, But that did actually give me pause. I thought, like, could she be homeschooled? And so I was like, well, let's think about that. You know, maybe that's a possibility. And just the fact that we were talking about it, I think was really big for her, you know, because she felt listened to. You know.
And yeah, I mean, the idea, like with so many of the books that we review for this podcast, is just this honoring of your child. And honestly, even if at 6, she wasn't great at problem solving, it's because she hasn't had a lot of practice at this. And after enough, you know, years of doing this with her patiently, and you listening, and you both coming up with ideas, and maybe some of yours are a little better than some of hers, she'll start kind of thinking about some of the things that it takes to problem solve better. Yeah, and they describe the book as being for kids that have a deficiency in problem solving, and kids who become more frustrated more often than normal. And I, when I was reading this, I was thinking about my role not as only as a parent, but just I think I'm often more frustrated more often than normal, you know? And I think my father was more frustrated more often than normal. And I think my sister is more frustrated more often than normal. And so, yeah, I mean, I was really interested in this book from a lot of different angles. And everything I'm doing with you know, with this podcast and reading these books, it's just like, it's not just about giving my child the best childhood they can have. It's about almost using my child and my fatherhood as a crutch to be practicing being who and how I want to be.
Yeah.
There's really nothing in this book that I wouldn't want to do anyway, even if I wasn't a father, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, like I say, I was really surprised, given how long ago I read it, how much kind of the stuff it brought up that I'd learned, like in Radical Honesty, but also learned in my training. And like, it just seems like common sense, you know? It's just really common sense. But it somehow needed him to write it down in the way that he did for me to kind of like understand, oh, this is what it looks like, you know? Yeah.
So my mom became her third career was a psychotherapist. So that was her last career. Now she's retired and she's suffering from Alzheimer's. But I had asked her if she thought I was kind of like that as a kid, like if I was easily frustrated and whatever. And she said, no, not at all. And I honestly think it's possible that with me, I've mirrored these behaviors more like recently, as I've just gone through tough times and struggles. And, you know, I had this mom who's kind of my rock all my life. And when she started deteriorating mentally, I think I started reacting more and more to like changed plans and instability and people not doing what they say and all of that, because like this kind of like rock foundation had been shaken. So when people let me down in some way or don't do what they say they're going to do, it's not just that issue. It's reminding me of how upset I am that my mom is dying, and this person that I've always been able to rely on, I can't rely on anymore. So again, it's not just for kids on the spectrum. I want to pull up another quote from the book. This is actually, again, in the preface, so I still haven't even gotten into the book with my part, but I won't pull you back too much more. But she just says that there's never been a better time to be living or working with a behaviorally challenging child. There's lots of research revealing new ways to help our children. I'm skipping ahead, but then she says, that's the good news. The bad news is that the new lenses can take some getting used to. The strategies in this book can be hard to implement early on, may be different from the ones you've been using, and may represent a departure from the way you were parented. So you'll need an open mind there too, along with some patience for yourself and your child as you're practicing new ways of interacting and solving problems together. And I like that too. I like that last part about patience with yourself and your child. And you don't have to do this, but after I read that, I thought of asking you for examples of when you're really proud of when you kind of put this kind of work into practice, and then maybe modeling forgiving yourself for times when you fail to do that. You don't have to do that. We can just keep talking about the book, whatever you prefer.
When you asked that, I thought that I remembered like a time definitely when before I started reading the book, when Faye would like lose her temper, and she would get so furiously angry, and she would like hit me or yell at me or throw stuff at me, and I would always say the same thing. I'd always say, like, you need to go to your room until you calm down. I'd say, like, you need to go to your room till you calm down. And I don't honestly know where I got that idea from. I was just like, seemed to be something that parents told their kids, like when their kids got violent. And I think I remember my dad saying it to my brother. But I remember like feeling mad when she threw stuff at me, or angry, or just like furiously angry. And it felt so like self-righteous to say to her, you need to go to your room to like calm down. And she'd go to her room and she'd wreck her room. Like she'd rip stuff off the walls, she'd smash shit up, you know, all over the place. And I'd go up and I'd see her room in this mess, and I'd of course be furious, you know. And I remember feeling like, when after I read that book, like I looked back at those times and I thought, what the hell was I thinking? You know, thinking that was in any way like a helpful kind of like way to be with her when she was mad, rather than talk to her, but not even notice my own anger, you know, and I was just really embarrassed when I read it, because I thought, like, where have I got these ideas from, that's like how you deal with anger, is you tell a child to take it somewhere else. Like, you're not safe. Like, basically I was saying, you're not safe with me, your anger's not safe with me, I don't feel safe, therefore you're not safe, and you, small child, go away and be by yourself with your anger, you know. And I, even now when I think about it, I feel like sad. I remember like going up to her room and seeing her sitting on the floor with her face all red and hot and angry, and all the stuff that she loved, like, wrecked, all just because I didn't think to just sit with her and be with her, you know, when she was angry.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want parents, as they read these books and as they listen to this stuff, to have compassion for themselves, not only for times like that before you kind of knew a better way to do it, but even after, you know, even when you do know a better way to do it, you know. I mean, I know you, I imagine you're an amazing mom, and I think we all do our best with what we've got, and that goes for our kids for sure. They do the best with what they've got, and then for us as parents. So yeah, I liked that part of the intro, just saying we need to have patience with ourselves too. We're not going to just flip a switch and build these new habits overnight. We're gonna have to practice them and have some compassion for ourselves when we fail. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the brain science too, because she talks about brain science kind of like coming further since she's read it. And I know you and I have been looking a little bit into like polyvagal theory and a little bit of like trauma informed therapy. And so I just want to say that, like, when we get triggered as parents or kids, the first step you mentioned is this kind of understanding, curiosity piece. And when we get angry, when we get triggered, a part of our brain is activated that isn't really capable of curiosity and understanding. And anybody have heard about like a hijack or you know, lizard brain hijack or whatever, you learn that that whole part of your brain, the hypothalamus, pituitary, amygdala, when it's activated, it has like a primacy over your frontal lobe and your prefrontal cortex. It has superiority. It pulls rank over the rest of your brain.
Mm.
And the parts of your brain that are capable of compassion and rational thinking and stuff, some awesome recent brain science too, is that it often goes into gear coming up with justifications for the decision that your lizard brain made. It doesn't go into gear correcting or contradicting that and saying, oh, maybe this isn't a threat like a tiger that I need to run from or fight or freeze about. It comes up with rational thinking that justifies that lizard brain response. So yeah, Greene suggests the first step is understanding. And a lot of the work that Laura and I do with Radical Honesty are a step even before that step of understanding, which is just like, what does it take for you to prime your brain, to prepare your mind for understanding in the face of your own reactivity? I just think it's such a Jedi like skill to like, when your kid's upset about something else, even when they're like hitting someone else and you feel so shocked and ashamed or whatever, or scared, most of us can handle that way better than when it's all our fault. You know, our kid is suffering and it's all because we're a horrible person and a horrible parent. And it takes a Jedi to like be able to respond to that in the same way we can respond when our kid is upset at something we aren't taking personally and it isn't pushing all of our own buttons. And yeah, I just want people to understand that like the brain piece, it's not like it's not your fault. It's how our brain, there are good reasons why the amygdala has primacy over your prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
But it doesn't usually work out so great when you're not being chased by a tiger or something like that.
One thing I will say about her, like, and I can only talk about her as like an individual, like, although I have a lot of, like, I've had and have a lot of clients who have Asperger's. I work with quite a lot of people that have Asperger's because I love working with people who have Asperger's, and I make a point of telling people that I'm interested, like, in working with people on the spectrum. And one of the things that I've noticed about her is that she is very much in kind of like contact with all of her like her sensations and with her body at all times, that she's not that great at describing it, like sometimes like in terms of like, you know, the actual kind of like describing words that we use to describe sensations, but she's absolutely in contact with her body. And one of the ways that I think of as an example of that is that she eats like only when she's hungry. She literally will only eat when she's hungry and will stop as soon as she's full, you know. And that's not something I've ever taught her or said to her, you know, you need to do this or that. It's like she's just so in tune with like what her body needs in terms of like nutrition, you know, that she'll eat and then just stop, like and like in terms of like pain and feeling like physical sensations, she's like extremely like sensitive to sensation and taste and smell, which is, you know, partly to do with the fact that it's been suggested she has a little sensory processing disorder. But as a result of that, she's really highly attuned to like sensations of any kind, like clothing, you know, like material and whatever's on her body, but also like whatever's touching her body as well.
Yeah.
So that for that reason, I think it's made it a lot easier for me to kind of get her in touch with her sensations and talk about her sensations when she's upset, or like you're describing, like when that kind of lizard brain like kicks in. It's like often what we'll do is like, okay, like what are you feeling now, like in your body? And she'll say like, you know, I can't breathe. And she's taking like little kind of breaths, like, so okay, notice your breathing, like notice your heart rate and things like that. And she's really, really good at getting in touch with that quickly. And that's something I've noticed generally about a lot of the kids, young people that I work with who are on the autistic spectrum, is they're very quick to understand what I mean when I say, give me a sensation, you know, like, yeah, I find that really interesting.
Yeah, the first person who ever asked me what I was feeling in my body and stuff was just a year or two before I went to my first Radical Honesty retreat. I went to see a therapist for my first time because of a breakup I had really struggled with. And I thought she was like, she might as well have been talking about crystals or aromatherapy or something. I thought she was just totally out there. And I didn't, yeah, as we get older, we get out of touch with our body. We have this layer of interpretation in our minds. And I didn't even know what it meant to not be living in my head. So it's definitely something kids are good at before we teach them to not be good at it. When you do that with her, like asking about body sensations or any other like steps recommended in this book, does it ever feel like kind of like stilted and like forced? I was kind of wondering that, because like when I get like really triggered, especially around a kid, like I'm not going to do the same things I would usually do with radical honesty and stuff, ways of getting over my anger that would involve them. Sometimes I like having just like some structure to fall back on with them, but I also know that they, you know, I wonder how they respond to something that doesn't feel really totally genuine.
I guess that was my sense when I was when I was rereading it, was a lot of this stuff that I do with her, we've been doing it for so long, it does feel really natural. And I wouldn't ever say like, give me a sensation like we do in radical honesty. I mean, I say to her like, what's going on now? Like, you know, and she knows that means like what's going on in your body, not like what's going on, you know. So like, what's going on now? And she'll say like, you know, or, you know, I've got like a pain here, or like, you know, I've got a headache, or like, yeah, I can't breathe, or something like that. And my sense is like the language kind of gets integrated a little bit into kind of everything that you do. And a lot of the time I don't even ask now. I mean, she'll just say like,
yeah. But at first, as you're building that practice, I imagine sometimes it's just going to feel a little forced. And that's kind of what building new habits is.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, like I haven't talked about her dad at all, but he had real issues like with this technique. Like when I started using it, he thought it was a bit too like therapy speak. And he was a bit resistant to her diagnosis initially. He didn't believe that she had Asperger's. I think he won't mind me saying that now. But he was a bit resistant to that idea, and he was just like, well, it could be this, it could be that, you know. And I was saying, well, you know, let's try this technique because it really seems to work. And I tried to get him to read the book, and he wouldn't read the book. And then after about 6 months of like working with her, like using this technique, and she was so much calmer that he still didn't read the book, but he did start to kind of say, so what are we doing? Like, sort of like listening to what it was I was saying. And I caught him like quite a few times where I was coming in and he was actually asking like those clarifying questions, like, oh, I see. So you're having trouble like holding the pencil, like, okay, so what do you think would help with that kind of thing? And of course, like the proof's in the pudding, isn't it? As soon as you see that they're responding to you in this different way and they're a lot kind of like happier and calmer, I mean, he saw straight away that it was all working. So he started using it too. But yeah, it was a kind of stealth technique with him, getting him to talk to her that way.
Yeah. I was reminded of, there's just this common theme in a lot of these books that we're selecting for this, which is again, just like really honoring your child. And I loved how much this book did that. It still does a little bit of like pulling rank. It doesn't mirror exactly what the other books do. But one question or one piece that really reminded me of another book Karen I just read was just saying like, you know, first that understanding, which I think, like you said, radical honesty really helps with, just focusing on separating what you're noticing from what you're imagining, and building that understanding. That in a lot of the other books, they talk about sports casting, which is just kind of reflecting back in words what people are saying or doing or seem to be feeling or something like that. So a lot of that, putting words to things in a way that's just reflecting and letting your child know that they're being seen and heard. I loved too that they said like, instead of just like jumping to solutions, like at least question, like, is this expectation you have for your child actually that important to you? Like, do they really need to keep their room that clean? Do they really need
like that hierarchy kind of technique used as well, of saying like, is this a category A, category B, category C problem? And like if it's category C, it's like it's actually not that important. And one of the examples he gives is brushing your teeth, which made me smile because it was something that came up in a workshop, radical honesty workshop, that there was a guy asking about his like giving his kid instructions, and Brad said like, you know, well, how important is it for him to brush his teeth? And this dad was like, well, very important. And Brad was like, is it though? You know?
It is in the United States, but not in London, not in UK.
Yeah, just but yeah, this guy was German in actual fact, but he won't mind me saying. But yeah, the point is, like, you know, there are certain things that kind of what he says in the book basically is like, pick your battles. You know, there are certain things which are just like, they're going to really like ramp up the anger, the tension, and like, if what we're trying to do is build this new way of being together, like some of these things can be let slide, you know. And he talks about like that sense of like parents kind of at war with that idea of like, you know, we can't let the kids like call the shots, but it's like, I'm calling the shot, I'm deciding what it is that's actually a category C, category B, category E, and do I really need to pick like this battle right now, or am I just gonna say, okay, okay, we won't brush your teeth tonight, you know, but you need to brush them tomorrow.
Yeah. I have a question for you as a radical honesty trainer and someone who's following this practice. So first, I love the problem solving process, and I love, you know, that it isn't unilateral, it isn't top down, it's like really collaborative, so that you're not really just focused on this issue at hand, you're focused on building this skill of problem solving with your child, and taking the patience and the extra time that it takes to do that. But we've also, you and I have learned in radical honesty that often like problem solving is sometimes just a way of avoiding experiencing some experience. And when you design solutions on top of like unresolved resentment or anger, the solutions can often be more about avoiding that sensation. And so I just wanted to ask you if that's something it's something that I thought of when I was reading this, but was curious with you as a parent, how you honor the feeling and let Faye really experience her experience and you experience your experience, so that when you get to the problem solving piece, you're kind of maybe a little bit more over it, or not just designing solutions that are avoiding.
Yeah, it's strange when you were saying that. I had a thought, like, I guess in a lot of ways, like me learning kind of like about radical honesty and the practice and like becoming a therapist and everything, is like one of the things I noticed about myself is I'm like way less reactive than I was like 10 years ago when she was like a little kid, you know, and that I guess my reactivity has lessened more and more like through my own practice and like what I do like for a living. And with her growing too, and it just doesn't bother me when she loses her shit, you know, and she gets that now. I mean, that thing I was describing to you when she was like 6 or 7, when she got really mad and like threw stuff at me, and I remember feeling like hot and angry, and like how all these stories about this makes me a terrible parent and I need to draw boundaries, and like there's so many stories, they're just not there anymore, you know. And she really picks up on that. I mean, you know, you can't fake like non-reaction, can you? You're either reactive and you're kind of like tamping it down and doing your best as a parent to look like, oh, this isn't bothering me, you know, or you just genuinely are just easier with the way that things go. And like one of the things that changed a lot, like after I started using this technique, was like I was really set on the idea of her fitting into that school and finding a way of being there. And within a few weeks of reading that book, I was like, she doesn't need to be here. I need to find another school that suits her better. And I started to look around for a better school, like a better fit for her. And up until that point, I had this very clear idea that she needed to change. And I guess that's partly kind of me like relaxing as well, like along with reading this and like working with her, is just like, yeah, all those expectations kind of got looked at and re-examined, you know. I don't know if that answered that question.
I don't know either. Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, you just mainly said that, yeah, you tend to not be as reactive. So when you are doing problem solving, it's not just about avoiding the problem. And I imagine just in your work with Faye, you don't jump straight to the solution. You give her a chance to kind of like experience her frustration or her upset or her anger.
Yeah, I like she still gets really frustrated. She has very high standards like for herself, and when she gets frustrated, like it comes out, you know, in kind of like verbal ways, or like she throws stuff, or she'll like screw up her drawings, or like, you know, but she kind of has learned to sort of witness that you know, in a way that I didn't ever think she would, you know, where she just kind of like moves through it in a way that just seems like really accepting of like, right now I'm going to be mad about this, you know, and then I'm going to pick up stuff and like get on with it. But there's no sense of like shame attached to it, which is what I imagined there used to be, that was coming up for me, and she was reflecting. And yeah, I think she processes anger in a really, really like healthy way a lot of the time. And I hear her like swearing at the top of her voice sometimes at like some game that she's playing, like you swear at the absolute top of her voice, like, and then I go in and I'll say, what's up, you know, what's happening, and she'll just go, oh, it's just this thing that just happened, and then she's just back to like playing the game, you know. And that's the other thing, I guess, is like they don't really talk about much in the book, is that we've always had this really kind of like open door policy to swearing in this house. It's like said to her, you can use any word you want, we don't care. Just like outside of this house, know that you'll probably be judged for doing it. And as a result, she doesn't really swear, you know, at all, apart from that games, Discord server, and that's it.
You know Kara Porba pretty well, right? Yeah. So I mean, one of Kara's challenges that's distinct from mine is, like a lot of moms and a lot of parents, she'll self-sacrifice and kind of like ignore her needs and boundaries or whatever, to the level where then she kind of like snaps, and the pendulum has to kind of like swing back the other way instead of finding that kind of happy medium. And in reading a lot of this, I was thinking, you know, like if this was a partner of yours or a friend or a boyfriend, you would find a way to process it, get over it, and still make the like rational choice of probably stepping away from that relationship. And I've been in one relationship with a partner who, it wasn't bad, but she described herself as abusive. And I remember thinking, like, I'm a well-adjusted human, you know, I can handle this stuff and I can whatever. And it wasn't until like years later that I even realized the kind of damage that did to me. And so I guess my question for you is like, how do you stay as a parent in a relationship with a child that you're going to be with for the rest of your life, but if anybody else was treating you that way, you wouldn't stay in that relationship? And how do you stay in that and not have it damage you?
I guess it does damage you, but like I think of the damage as just like it's like the damage that an antique gets, you know, that kind of adds to its age or something like that. It's just it's kind of knocked the corners off me, and there've been a lot of things that I've sacrificed as a result of her being in my life. And how I stay in the kind of relationship with her, apart from like the obvious, you know, which is just like unfathomable amounts of love that you have for like a kid of your own that you've raised, you know, is like just I've just always been endlessly curious about people, like I mean everyone on planet Earth, and like she is one of the most fascinating creatures on Earth. She really is. Like from a very small like child, she's absolutely fascinated me, and I'm not generally fascinated by children, you know, and not just because she's my kid. She's a fascinating person, you know. And everyone who meets her says the same thing, like, wow, what a fascinating kid, you know. She said the way her brain works and the way that her kind of like her kind of mind jumps about is just like amazing to me. And I'm constantly like asking myself, like, how did I create this kid? You know, it's just like, I don't know how I did it. And then I ask myself, have I, you know, did I, or did she just come into the world like fully formed like this? Have I actually had any influence over who she is as a person? So yeah, it's like fascination, like curiosity, insane amounts of love. But mostly just curiosity, I think, because I just want to know how she turns out. You know? She's amazing, you know? Yeah.
And how has it shifted how you relate to other people that you see, you know, having outbursts or kind of having difficulty with things?
Well, I guess it's hard to differentiate between like how like having her and kind of dealing with her like issues and like everything that I've learned like in terms of being a therapist, because I don't think that stuff can be pulled apart. Is that I'm always just really curious now when people get mad and angry and sad. And actually I have to be careful a lot of the time, is that I imagine like my my kind of go-to place is always like what's going on for them, and often it's what the person who's being attacked or is having the anger directed at needs is for me to say, this is not okay, you know. But a lot of the time with clients, I'm always like curious, like what's going on with this person in your life who's mad at you, or your kid who's mad at you. So yeah, I guess my curiosity knows no bounds, you know. It's like I'm always curious about I'm most curious about people that are kind of like not like neurotypical, I guess. They're the people that I'm most curious about, and like fascinated by, and the more I kind of do this work, the more I know that that's the area where I'm kind of like moving towards all the time. Is that I just want to understand everyone, I guess. I could see the results like straight away, like when I was using it with her, and when I came to actually train to be a therapist, and that was one of the first things we learned, is that a lot of people struggled with doing that in a way that was like authentic. It's like, so what do? I just repeat back what they say, like how does that help, you know? And I was kind of like, no, that's not what you're doing. Is you're actually like listening to the words like coming out, and you're saying like, oh yeah, I hear them, I hear what you're saying, you know. You could just as easily say, I hear you, couldn't you? I mean, that's what we say a lot of the time. Yeah, I hear you. But that's kind of a cliche, isn't it? Whereas if I say to you, yeah, and repeat back what it is that you've said, you know, I have actually heard you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We read another book called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk. And that was also about that, just repeating back what your kids say. And yeah, it works so well with everyone.
It does. Yeah, it really does. And like I sometimes say, because I see a lot of students, like student therapists for their mandatory counselling hours. And one of the things I say to them is like, really, that's all you really need to learn how to do. It's just be in a room with someone, be yourself, and listen, and let them know that you're listening to them. And actually it's been proved like by countless therapists, is that anyone who does that will have the same effects, like in terms of kind of like positive effects on people's mental health as like a trained psychotherapist. It's just you just need to let them know that you're listening and be with them.
Yeah, it really doesn't come naturally for me, for sure. And I'm just so often in like such a hurry. And I think you've probably heard of that study. There's a study that says like of all things, like from being in a bad mood to having like bad things happen to you to all these different like variables on your mood, the one thing that like takes our compassion and kind of like morals and ethics away is like being in a rush. Like have you heard of that study where they like have the people in like one room on campus, and then they have them go to another room for the study, and then like en route to the other room, like some person that they don't know as part of the study like trips and falls, or like has a heart attack in the middle of the hallway or something like that. And like worse than anything, like than telling them bad news or anything, the one thing that made people like the least compassionate to like stop and help this person was just being told that they had to get to this other room in some time, in some like hurry or something.
That doesn't surprise me at all. I haven't heard of that study, but yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
So for me, like the number one step is slowing down. If I want to just listen and repeat back, just slow down. There's no like hurry to get to these answers. And yeah, it's so much better for our children when you give them a chance to get to them themselves.
Yeah.
And they might come up with something better for sure.
Totally. In fact, I wanted to just tell you this like story of something that happened this week, which when I was reading this book, I was like, oh, this is such an example. Is that all those years that we were doing that, and we were kind of doing the kind of like 3 steps, and when we got to the invitation stage, it was always like, so how are we going to solve this? And often I, like you say, my ideas were slightly better than hers a lot of the time, and hers weren't terribly realistic sometimes. And I hadn't really thought about this book for a long time until you asked me like for a recommendation. But the other day she's just started back like at school, and the weather's pretty bad at the moment, and at lunchtimes they've been asking the kids to go out into this covered area where there's a lot of kids, and she's very reactive to sound. she hates like a lot of noise, and
Mhm.
she said she seemed really low, and I said like, what's up? You seem really low, what's up? And she said, oh, like lunchtimes, like go out and lunchtimes, and she said, and there's so much noise and there's loads of kids, and I just want to be quiet. I want to be somewhere quiet at lunchtime. And I said, oh, okay, like you want to be somewhere quiet? I said, can you go to the library? She said, no, I'm not allowed in the library. I said, oh, are there any clubs you can go to? I said, no, I don't like going to clubs. And I was like, shit, this is a bummer, let's think about this. I said, and I went away, and I was kind of a little bit annoyed with the school. Fucking school, why aren't they providing a quiet area for my kid? She came home from school next day, happy, put her bag down. I said, oh, you seem really chill. And she said, yeah, she said, I thought about the library. And she said, I went to the library, and I said to the librarian, this library's kind of untidy. Do you need someone to help me tidy it up? And the librarian was like, yeah, maybe. And she said, so I'm spending my lunchtimes in the library now, like tidying up the library, putting stickers on the books. And I was like, what? And she said, yeah, I get to eat my lunch there. It's great. And I was like, wow.
Awesome.
Amazing. She just came up with that all by herself, like that solution. And like not only that, but actually proactively went and asked for what she wanted. And she got what she wanted. And now she's really happy. She gets spent every lunchtime in the library.
Good.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. Anything else about the book you want to share?
Just like anybody who has like conflict like with their kid, where they're trying to resolve stuff and they're conscious of like getting into self-righteous mode, which is something I notice like even now is like get into self-righteous mode, because if you notice yourself getting like triggered and angry around your kids, you have a story, I don't want to be triggered and angry, I want to put boundaries in place. It's like all of those things is like this book is so helpful with all of that stuff, because it works in two ways. Like it works in a very pragmatic solution based kind of like way, like try these 3 steps and it will transform your life with your kid. But it also in a very subtle way, it kind of really gets you to look at the ways that you trigger yourself, and it gets you to look at the ways that you create expectations, and it gets you to look at how you prioritize stuff, like, and exactly like you're saying, it gets you to think about your own childhood and think like, yeah, that was happening to me, and actually that was really frustrating for me. And also like my sense is one of the best ways that I relate to my kid is talking to her about like my childhood, like telling her stories about what happened to me when I was being raised, and that she really relates to those stories much more than she does like instructions, solutions, and for that reason I think, I mean, it's one of those books I've recommended to 30, 40 parents like over the years, and I actually bought several paper copies of it to give to people because I wasn't getting them back, and everyone I know who's read it has said the same thing. It's like, wow, it's just so simple, like why didn't I think of that? It's almost dumb.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for recommending it, and I'm grateful for you doing it with Faye. And yeah, I want to again just reiterate that whether your child has special needs or gets more frustrated more often than normal or not, yeah, this is just such a useful process. So thank you. All right. Well, you've been listening to the Radical Parenting Podcast. You can hear us on Denver Open Media Radio, 92.9 FM, 89.3 HD3. You can listen to us online. We're now launching a new section of the Radical Honesty website for this podcast and for other radical parenting resources. So yeah, please take a look at the links below. We'll add a link to the book and a link to the Lives in the Balance website and resources as well at livesinthebalance.org. So thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week. Thank you, Laura. It's good to see you.
And you.
All right.